When audiences first encountered Pit Bulls and Parolees, they were introduced to a narrative that felt both intimate and defiant. A woman rescuing stigmatized dogs while offering employment to formerly incarcerated men. The emotional architecture of the show rested on redemption, of animals, of people, and, by implication, of the American belief in second chances. Yet the conclusion of the series in 2022 revealed a harder truth. Behind the televised triumphs stood a fragile financial ecosystem, institutional conflicts, legal strain, and the emotional cost of sustaining a mission built more on conviction than capital. The story of is therefore not simply inspirational. It is a study in resilience under structural pressure. Born on June 11, 1960, in Southern California, Torres's early life unfolded against instability. Her parents separated when she was young, and economic insecurity shaped her formative years. The presence of a steady stepmother became central, modeling endurance, emotional discipline, and a belief in the intrinsic value of animals. For Torres, animals were not ornamental companions. They were stabilizing presences amid human unpredictability. Her attachment to a Catahoula leopard dog named Cougar, along with horses and even a goat, reveals something foundational. Animals offered continuity when people could not. At 17, she left home, not as an act of rebellion but as an assertion of self-determination. Traveling with her animals, often sleeping in trucks or trailers, she learned that survival required both grit and loyalty. These years were not romantic. They were cold, uncertain, and financially precarious, but they solidified the emotional blueprint that would later define her rescue philosophy. Torres's time in the military introduced structure and discipline. Later, work as a truck driver and counselor for gang-involved youth sharpened her understanding of marginalization. The through line between these experiences is critical. She came to see vulnerability not as weakness but as circumstance. Whether working with troubled teenagers or abandoned animals, she resisted narratives of disposability. The catalytic moment came in a Los Angeles shelter when she encountered a scarred pit bull from a violent crime scene. Rather than fear, she recognized gentleness, particularly in the dog's calm response to her daughters. This encounter disrupted the prevailing mythology surrounding pit bulls. It also ignited a mission, to confront breed stigma and to advocate for dogs systematically misunderstood. Villalobos Rescue Center began with wolves and wolf-dog hybrids before pivoting toward pit bulls, another population burdened by fear-based stereotypes. Torres recognized parallels. Both animals existed in the public imagination as threats rather than beings shaped by environment and treatment. Between 1999 and 2010, her partnership with Los Angeles Animal Services through a pit bull support group demonstrated a pragmatic turn. Low-cost spay and neuter programs, training classes, and community support reframed rescue as prevention. Importantly, Torres extended her second chance philosophy to people, hiring formerly incarcerated individuals and offering housing and employment. Villalobos thus evolved into a dual rehabilitation space. Dogs regained trust. Men regained dignity. The symbolic power of this pairing would later become the narrative core of her television career. In 2009, Animal Planet premiered Pit Bulls and Parolees. The show translated Torres's grassroots mission into serialized storytelling. Viewers witnessed rescues, adoptions, heartbreak, and healing. The move from California to Louisiana became dramatic arc and logistical spectacle. Television did more than raise awareness, it stabilized finances. Donations increased. Adoption rates climbed. The rescue expanded. Yet this growth masked vulnerability. Revenue became intertwined with production contracts and corporate decisions far beyond Torres's control. When Discovery merged with Warner Brothers, programming priorities shifted. The cancellation of the series in 2022 was not framed as a moral judgment but as corporate realignment. Still, the impact was existential. The loss of television income exposed how precarious non-profit ecosystems can be when reliant on media exposure. In 2010, facing escalating permit restrictions and costs in Los Angeles County, Torres relocated Villalobos to New Orleans. The migration of over 200 dogs across state lines was both logistical feat and symbolic rebirth. Louisiana offered space and fewer bureaucratic barriers. Yet institutional friction followed her. A failed attempt to establish operations in Tallahassee, California, blocked by permit denial, demonstrated how local governance structures can thwart even well-publicized humanitarian efforts. Rescue work, for all its emotional resonance, exists within regulatory frameworks that are often indifferent to mission-driven urgency. Perhaps the most destabilizing episode was the lawsuit known as the Crescent City 5 case. Former associates accused Torres while simultaneously facing allegations of animal cruelty and theft. The emotional violence of betrayal compounded financial strain. Court-imposed silence prevented her from publicly defending herself for over a year. Legal defense costs reportedly reached six figures, forcing the sale of equipment and assets. Though the case was ultimately dismissed in her favor, the episode underscores a sobering truth. Non-profit activism operates within adversarial legal systems that can drain resources regardless of outcome. Victory did not erase the toll. It merely halted further damage. Torres's marriage to Aaron Marcus Jackson in 2006 symbolized her belief in rehabilitation beyond rhetoric. His incarceration history did not deter her. It aligned with her philosophy. Their eventual separation in 2018 revealed that personal redemption narratives are not immune to strain. Her children, Tanya, Mariah, Karnani, and Mo, remained integral to Villalobos' operations. Family labor and emotional solidarity became structural supports when institutional ones faltered. The rescue was not an enterprise detached from domestic life, it was an extension of it. The end of Pit Bulls and Parolees coincided with the economic pressures of the COVID-19 pandemic. Rising costs and shrinking donations demanded innovation. Torres initially launched Rabid Reality, a streaming platform devoted to rescue storytelling. The concept was bold: bypass corporate networks and build an independent media ecosystem. Technical failures and creative disagreements, however, forced its closure within a year. The lesson was instructive. Digital autonomy requires technological infrastructure and managerial expertise beyond moral commitment. Her subsequent pivot to Patreon and YouTube marked strategic recalibration. Rather than constructing new platforms, she leveraged existing ones. Subscription tiers provided predictable microfunding. Content such as Life with the Underdogs and podcast series fostered direct audience intimacy. Crucially, this model reduced overhead and restored narrative control. Today, Villalobos continues operating in Louisiana, sustained by diversified revenue streams and community loyalty. The rescue remains a site where stigmatized dogs and marginalized people intersect in mutual rehabilitation. The broader cultural significance lies in perception change. Pit bulls, once shorthand for aggression, have been reframed through sustained storytelling as affectionate, loyal companions. Media representation played a decisive role in this shift. Yet Torres's experience also exposes the volatility of celebrity-backed activism. Visibility can amplify impact, but it can also tether survival to corporate agendas. Tia Torres's trajectory complicates the comforting arc of televised redemption. It reveals how compassion must negotiate bureaucracy, litigation, corporate consolidation, and digital instability. Her endurance is less about romantic heroism than about adaptive pragmatism. Second chances, in her world, are not abstract ideals. They are daily labor, feeding, cleaning, negotiating permits, defending lawsuits, repairing hurricane damage, and rebuilding revenue models. If Pit Bulls and Parolees offered audiences catharsis, the years that followed offered something rarer: a study in persistence after applause fades. Her legacy is therefore twofold. She altered public perception of a maligned breed, and she demonstrated that redemption is infrastructural as much as emotional. It requires systems, sustainability, and the courage to pivot when foundations crack. In that sense, Torres's story is not about a television show's ending. It is about what remains when spectacle disappears, a mission sustained by stubborn hope, disciplined reinvention, and the enduring belief that neither dogs nor people should be defined by their worst moments. If the first phase of Tia Torres's public life can be read as a narrative of ascension, grassroots rescue transformed into televised advocacy, the second phase reveals a more complex truth: visibility is both currency and liability. What television constructed as heroic continuity masked the structural instability beneath non-profit activism. When the cameras left, the rescue remained, but without the infrastructure that spectacle had quietly subsidized. This second chapter is not merely about survival. It is about recalibration in a culture that consumes redemption stories but rarely funds their maintenance. Animal rescue occupies a unique moral economy. It trades in urgency, vulnerability, and the emotive force of suffering. Donations often spike in response to crisis, a hurricane, a cruelty case, a particularly compelling rescue. Television amplified this emotional economy, translating individual stories into episodic arcs designed for attention and advertising cycles. Yet emotional attention is cyclical. When a series ends, so too does the steady rhythm of narrative reinforcement. Torres faced a paradox common to mission-driven organizations that achieve media prominence. The very platform that scales awareness can create dependency. Once removed, it exposes how fragile the underlying financial structure always was. The post-television era demanded a philosophical shift from spectacle-based funding to community-based sustainability. Patreon subscriptions and YouTube engagement are not simply alternative revenue streams. They represent a decentralization of support. Rather than one corporate partner underwriting exposure, thousands of individuals contribute modest sums. This model is less glamorous but arguably more resilient. It transforms audience into stakeholder. Torres's public persona complicates conventional gender narratives. She embodies physical authority, emotional intensity, and unapologetic directness, traits often coded as masculine in leadership contexts. Yet her work is grounded in caregiving, relational labor, and maternal metaphors. In the rescue world, women frequently carry operational responsibility without institutional recognition. Torres's television presence disrupted that invisibility. However, visibility also invited scrutiny. Female leaders in emotionally charged fields are often judged through contradictory lenses. Too soft if empathetic, too harsh if disciplined. Torres's blunt communication style, at times polarizing, can be read as a survival mechanism within this double bind. Her leadership reveals how compassion requires boundaries. Running a rescue of hundreds of animals demands not only tenderness but enforcement, of standards, of expectations, of loyalty. The Crescent City 5 lawsuit, with its elements of betrayal, illustrates how blurred relational lines can destabilize organizations built on trust. Non-profit ecosystems rely heavily on relational networks, volunteers, foster families, collaborators. Trust is not peripheral, it is infrastructural. When former allies initiated legal action, the rupture was not only financial but existential. The court-imposed silence during litigation deepened the psychological strain. In an era of constant digital commentary, enforced quiet can feel like narrative erasure. Torres could not publicly defend herself while rumors circulated. For a leader accustomed to transparency, sometimes to a fault, this imposed muteness intensified isolation. The ultimate dismissal of the case affirmed her legal position, but legal victory rarely restores emotional equilibrium. The deeper wound lay in the realization that mission alignment does not guarantee moral alignment. Rescue work, like any field involving resources and recognition, attracts both devotion and opportunism. One of the understated aspects of Torres's resilience is the integration of family into institutional life. Her children are not peripheral figures, they are operational anchors. In this configuration, the boundary between domestic and professional spheres dissolves. This blending offers strength, shared labor, shared values, shared sacrifice, but also vulnerability. Financial instability affects household security. Public criticism targets not only the founder but her children. Divorce and personal upheaval unfold under the shadow of collective responsibility. Yet this model also reflects a philosophical stance. Rescue is not a career separate from life, it is life. For Torres, the mission is familial in both literal and symbolic terms. The dogs are not inventory, they are kin. The formerly incarcerated employees are not staff alone, they are extended family. Such intimacy fosters loyalty but complicates governance. It demands emotional stamina rarely acknowledged in organizational analysis. The failure of rabid reality demonstrates a critical lesson in contemporary media. Passion does not equal platform stability. Building independent infrastructure requires technological fluency, strategic partnerships, and sustained capital. However, its collapse was not wasted effort. It clarified that audience loyalty did not depend on novelty of platform but authenticity of voice. The pivot to established digital ecosystems, Patreon and YouTube, reflects adaptive intelligence. Rather than constructing a gated media empire, Torres opted for accessibility. Digital directness reshapes power dynamics. Without network intermediaries, she retains editorial control. She decides what to share, how to frame it, and when. This autonomy reduces vulnerability to corporate restructuring. Yet it also shifts the burden of promotion, editing, and engagement onto her team. Independence increases freedom but intensifies labor. Beyond institutional survival lies a broader cultural achievement: perceptual change. When Villalobos began emphasizing pit bulls, the breed occupied a heavily stigmatized position in American discourse, associated with violence, criminality, and urban decay. Television humanized individual dogs, replacing abstract fear with specific stories. Viewers watched formerly abused animals learn trust, bond with families, and exhibit gentleness. This reframing did not erase breed-specific legislation or public anxiety, but it complicated the narrative. The significance here extends beyond animal welfare. Pit bulls became symbolic stand-ins for marginalized populations more broadly. The message was subtle yet persistent: environment shapes behavior, compassion alters trajectory. In advocating for dogs, Torres implicitly advocated for rehabilitative justice in human systems. Hurricanes, economic downturns, legal disputes, and pandemics form a backdrop of chronic instability. Rescue work rarely operates in calm conditions. Natural disasters in Louisiana threatened physical infrastructure. Rising veterinary costs strained budgets. Pandemic disruptions curtailed adoption events and volunteer participation. Torres's response pattern suggests a philosophy of crisis normalization. Rather than perceiving each setback as anomaly, she anticipates disruption as inherent. This orientation reduces paralysis. It allows recalibration without existential collapse. There is, however, a deeper ethical question embedded in her story. At what point does perseverance become self-sacrifice? Rescue culture often valorizes exhaustion, long hours, financial risk, emotional depletion, as proof of devotion. Torres's trajectory invites reflection on sustainability not only for organizations but for individuals. How does one protect personal well-being while carrying collective expectation? How does a mission endure without consuming its architect? These tensions remain unresolved but visible. Her continued public presence suggests that for Torres, withdrawal is inconceivable. The work is identity. Yet her strategic pivots indicate maturation, a recognition that martyrdom is not a funding model. Nearly 3 decades into Villalobos' existence, its impact cannot be measured solely in adoption numbers. It resides in narrative transformation, in altered assumptions about both dogs and people. It resides in the thousands who now perceive pit bulls differently because they watch them rehabilitate on screen. The end of a television show did not conclude the mission. It stripped it of spectacle and revealed its core. What remains is less dramatic but more instructive: daily labor sustained by dispersed community support. Tia Torres' story, viewed in full, is neither triumphalist nor tragic. It is iterative. Each phase, military discipline, grassroots rescue, televised fame, legal adversity, digital reinvention, builds upon the previous without erasing it. Her enduring lesson lies in adaptive conviction. Compassion alone cannot sustain an institution. It must be paired with structural flexibility, diversified support, and an acceptance that public attention is transient. In the quiet after cameras stop rolling, what endures is routine: feeding schedules, vet appointments, paperwork, negotiations, digital uploads, and the slow work of trust building between species. That unglamorous persistence is the true measure of her legacy. When a long-running television series ends, cultural memory tends to compress its subject into a simplified symbol. In the case of Pit Bulls and Parolees, the dominant image remained cinematic: Chains rattling open, a frightened dog stepping into sunlight, a hardened man softening as he offers a cautious hand. Yet what persists after the credits roll is less photogenic. It is maintenance. It is repetition. It is the untelevised discipline of sustaining belief in second chances within systems that often resist them. For Tia Torres, the post-television years do not represent decline but demystification. Without network framing, her work is revealed as what it always was: logistical, exhausting, bureaucratic, and morally stubborn. One of the most powerful cultural contributions of Pit Bulls and Parolees was its refusal to isolate redemption as symbolic. Dogs labeled dangerous were rehabilitated. Men labeled criminal were employed. But redemption here was not sentimental absolution. It was structured routine. Feeding schedules, kennel cleaning, behavioral training, probation compliance. These mundane acts constituted transformation. In American popular culture, redemption narratives are often instantaneous. A single turning point, a confessional moment, a dramatic rescue. Torres's model rejects immediacy. Change, whether in a traumatized dog or a formerly incarcerated employee, unfolds through repetition and accountability. This insistence on process complicates the audience's appetite for spectacle. It demands patience rather than applause. There is an underexamined dimension to long-term activism: cumulative fatigue. Nearly 3 decades of crisis management, hurricanes in Louisiana, permit battles in California, lawsuits, financial strain, pandemic disruptions do not leave leaders unchanged. They calcify resilience but also accumulate strain. Torres's public persona has always balanced intensity with vulnerability. Yet the endurance required to sustain Villalobos raises questions about leadership succession and institutional continuity. What happens to mission-driven organizations when their founders are synonymous with their identity? Charismatic leadership can mobilize extraordinary loyalty. It can also create dependency structures that are difficult to decentralize. The pivot to digital platforms such as Patreon and YouTube suggests awareness of this vulnerability. By building community-based funding, Torres distributes responsibility outward. The rescue becomes not the property of a single figure but a collective investment. Corporate cancellation of the show was not merely financial loss, it was narrative interruption. 4 years, editing rooms shaped the portrayal of Villalobos, compressing complexity into 42-minute arcs. With that apparatus gone, Torres regained narrative sovereignty. Direct-to-audience platforms eliminate mediation but increase exposure. Without network filters, every statement carries unbuffered weight. This shift reflects a broader transformation in media ecology. Authenticity now competes with algorithmic volatility. Survival requires both emotional transparency and strategic restraint. In reclaiming her voice, Torres also confronts the instability of digital publics. Supporters are loyal, but online ecosystems shift rapidly. Sustainability depends not on virality but on consistency, a lesson hard-earned through the collapse of rabid reality. The rehabilitation of pit bulls is inseparable from broader socio-political anxieties. Historically associated with urban poverty and violence, the breed became shorthand for fear. Torres's advocacy destabilized that shorthand. Through sustained storytelling, individual dogs replaced abstraction. Viewers witnessed gentleness contradict stereotype. This reframing parallels debates in criminal justice reform, where individuals are often reduced to their worst act. By juxtaposing dogs and parolees, Torres constructed an implicit argument: identity is not destiny. Such symbolism is powerful but fragile. It depends on narrative continuity. The absence of weekly episodes risks gradual cultural amnesia. Yet the impact of 19 seasons lingers. Breed stigma has not vanished, but public perception has softened. Awareness campaigns now draw upon imagery once marginalized. Villalobos' trajectory offers instructive lessons for non-profit governance. Reliance on a single major funding stream, however lucrative, creates systemic risk. Mission-driven work must maintain governance structures that protect against internal betrayal. Control over storytelling influences sustainability and public trust. Direct supporter engagement strengthens resilience beyond corporate sponsorship. These insights extend beyond animal rescue. They resonate across activist movements navigating the tension between visibility and vulnerability. Public figures often become mythologized into archetypes: the rescuer, the warrior, the uncompromising advocate. Yet Torres's life contains divorce, financial anxiety, interpersonal fracture, ordinary human vulnerabilities that complicate myth. The temptation to narrativize her as indefatigable obscures a more compelling truth: endurance is rarely glamorous. It is frequently anxious, occasionally uncertain, sometimes lonely. What distinguishes her trajectory is not immunity to hardship but refusal to disengage. The question of legacy is less about whether Villalobos will persist and more about how. Its future likely depends on institutionalization beyond individual charisma. Digital patronage offers scaffolding, but long-term stability may require formalized governance, expanded leadership roles, and continued adaptation to shifting regulatory climates. Still, the rescue's philosophical core remains intact. Second chances are operational commitments, not slogans. Dogs continue to arrive bearing trauma. People continue to seek work bearing stigma. The intersection of these needs sustains relevance. When television cameras depart, applause fades. What remains are kennels to clean, medical bills to pay, staff to train, content to produce, and supporters to reassure. The romance of rescue dissolves into maintenance. Yet perhaps this is the truest expression of compassion, not the dramatic save but the unending return to responsibility. Tia Torres's story, taken in its entirety, resists tidy moral packaging. It is marked by heartbreak and reinvention, betrayal and recalibration. Her work endures because it is not contingent on spotlight. It is contingent on conviction. In an era of fleeting attention spans and algorithm-driven fame, such steadiness feels almost radical. If redemption has political implications, Torres has demonstrated its infrastructural demands. It requires housing, employment, veterinary care, legal defense funds, digital literacy, and relentless administrative labor. It requires community. It requires belief. And so the legacy of Pit Bulls and Parolees is not confined to 19 seasons. It survives in altered perceptions, in adopted dogs sleeping safely in new homes, in men who discovered purpose through structured responsibility, and in a rescue that continues. Less visible perhaps, but no less vital. After the applause, there is work. Tia Torres chose to keep working. When the public narrative of Pit Bulls and Parolees concluded, what remained was not spectacle but structure. The absence of cameras stripped away episodic urgency and revealed the deeper question facing Tia Torres and Villalobos Rescue. Can a mission forged in charisma endure beyond the height of its visibility? Founder-led institutions often conflate identity with infrastructure. For nearly 3 decades, Torres's voice, temperament, and moral conviction have functioned as both symbolic and operational anchors. Her leadership style, direct, uncompromising, and emotionally transparent, created loyalty but also centralized authority. The sustainability of Villalobos now depends on whether its systems are strong enough to function without constant personal intervention. Succession, in this context, is not merely administrative. It is philosophical. Torres's children and longtime team members possess lived immersion in the rescue's ethos. They understand its rhythms, its crises, its moral framework. Yet institutional longevity requires more than familiarity. It demands formalized governance, financial planning, and distributed leadership. If Villalobos is to outlive its founder, it must transition from personality-driven resilience to structurally embedded resilience. The post-television era has accelerated this maturation. The shift from network-funded programming to community-supported platforms such as Patreon and YouTube reflects strategic decentralization. Rather than relying on a single corporate entity, the rescue now draws strength from thousands of micro-contributors. This model disperses risk. It also transforms viewers into stakeholders. Support is no longer passive consumption but participatory maintenance. There is, however, an emotional cost to such visibility. Public leadership in moral enterprises invites constant scrutiny. Supporters expect unwavering consistency. Critics search for contradiction. For Torres, whose mission intertwines with her personal identity, this scrutiny carries particular weight. The collapse of rabid reality and the legal trauma of the Crescent City 5 lawsuit demonstrated how fragile public trust can feel, even when legally vindicated. Yet these crises also reinforced a crucial lesson. Transparency, though imperfect, builds long-term credibility. Beyond institutional mechanics lies a broader cultural legacy. The reframing of pit bulls from menace to misunderstood companion did not occur in isolation. It was cultivated through sustained storytelling. By pairing dogs with formerly incarcerated workers, Torres created a symbolic parallel that challenged deterministic thinking. Environment, she argued implicitly, shapes behavior. Opportunity fosters transformation. That message extends beyond animal rescue into debates about criminal justice, stigma, and social reintegration. In this sense, Villalobos operates as a living critique of disposability culture. Neither dogs nor people are defined solely by their worst moments. Rehabilitation requires infrastructure, kennels, training programs, employment structures, not merely optimism. The rescue's endurance proves that compassion must be organized to survive. Yet endurance also demands recalibration. Early years emphasized expansion. More dogs, more space, more exposure. The present phase reflects consolidation. Sustainability has replaced spectacle as the governing principle. The rescue's continued operation in Louisiana suggests acceptance that growth without structural reinforcement invites collapse. Choosing stability over scale may ultimately safeguard the mission's future. What, then, will outlive Tia Torres? Not the television ratings, nor even the specific buildings housing rescued animals. What endures is an ethic. Second chances are operational commitments, not sentimental slogans. They require discipline, boundaries, and accountability. They require community investment. If legacy is measured by cultural shift, Torres has already altered public perception of a maligned breed. If measured by institutional survival, the coming years will test the durability of Villalobos without network amplification. But perhaps the most significant measure lies in continuity. The daily, untelevised repetition of care. After the applause fades, kennels must still be cleaned. Dogs must still be fed. Paperwork must still be filed. The romance of rescue dissolves into routine. And it is within that routine, not in spectacle, that the true endurance of second chances is proven.